Welcome back, fight fans, to another episode of Career Profiles. Delighted to be back. We've had a little bit of a hiatus if you've been keeping up to date with us and you've been listening, but if you're just coming into this particular episode as a one-off, welcome. I hope you enjoy it. We've got an absolute great episode for you today, and it's a great episode because it's one that's been requested multiple times by multiple listeners to the podcast. It's all about Salvador Sanchez, a guy who we always talk about what if. You know, he's the big what if of boxing because, you know, of his untimely demise, and we'll discuss his career throughout this episode and elements of his life outside of the ring, and maybe a couple of stories that you didn't really know about. And Johnston, you know, this is something that we've wanted to do for a while, Salvador Sanchez. I know you've mentioned this a few times in passing conversations we've had, but one of the biggest issues with doing this particular podcast was always going to be how much information can we actually source on Salvador Sanchez, because it is really, really difficult, because really he passed away when he was only just really getting started in his boxing career.
Exactly, and that's what makes it difficult. The fact that he wasn't English speaking as well. He's obviously spoke Spanish, and he was from Mexico. It's just harder for us to be able to source the information that we would normally do for a career profile. But saying that, the fact that, you know, in a very short period of his life, he was able to, you know, turn professional and box young, and then we'll go through his career, and we've managed to source quite a few bits of information which we didn't think we was going to do at the beginning. But you know, one thing I will say about Salvador Sanchez, he is probably, for me, the best featherweight that's ever lived, even at that short period of time that we're going to go through now. He really is. As you say, it was a big what if. There's other names on that list that I'm sure could rival him, but I don't think there are many that could have defeated Salvador Sanchez, and obviously we'll go through that. But what a terrific fighter he was.
So as always, we'll get into the early beginnings and the origins of Salvador Sanchez, who was born Salvador Sanchez Navarez, and he was born to a lower middle class family on January the 26th, 1959, in the small city of Santiago Tijuanaguastenco in Mexico. It's about an hour's drive south from Mexico City, and the village population was estimated at around 3,000. Now, he was one of 11 children to his mother, Maria Lucia, and father, Felipe Sanchez, who owned a small construction company. Now, Sanchez got into fighting early, but never at school, and as he quoted in his own words, only before and after school. And he spoke to Sports Illustrated throughout his short career, and he mentioned that trouble would start when the other guys would look me over and see how little I was, and then steal my books and pencils. And things for Salvador would get heated if another kid called him Nena or little girl. And Salvador said, then I would have to show them I had the tools. There are a lot of bloody noses and bloody eyes. Unfortunately, sometimes they were mine. Now, it was through defending himself that he realised how much he enjoyed fighting, and he said, I found out that I liked hitting people, and I didn't like school, so I started boxing. Salvador's oldest brother Thomas recalls that their mother was always after Salvador to stop fighting. We all were. None of us paid any attention to his boxing. Actually, we thought it was the thing that youngsters go through, and then they get over. We kept telling him that there was nothing for him in boxing, and we actually never took it seriously. Now, as a youngster, Sanchez was a wrestling fan who also liked to salsa dance, but it was his closest friend, Jose Sosa, who took him into boxing, taking him to his first gym when he was just 13. Sanchez soon fell in love with the sport and found that he was a natural. In under 10 bouts as an amateur, he won all of them. Outside of the gym, Sanchez continued to fight and soon got a reputation as a street fighter. While in the ring, he had a very brief spell as an amateur, but then decided to turn professional on May the 4th, 1975 at the age of 16. Initially campaigning at bantamweight, he came through a very tough fight with a broken nose, and he knocked out fellow debutant Al Gardeno in Veracruz in Mexico.
Some nice little stories there on his wrestling and how he found boxing, and many sources they've indicated that he actually dropped out of school at 16 and moved to Mexico City, where he was introduced to a wealthy lawyer. His name was Juan Jose Torres Landa, and he actually served as an advisor to 4 other Mexican world champions. Torres Landa then began planning Sanchez's career, organising bouts throughout Mexico and the southwestern America with an eventual title fight in mind, even at that early stage. And Sanchez was actually managed by Cristobal Rojas and trained by a personal physician, Dr. Jose Valancula, who actually created a training regime that increased cardio and recovery. He made Sanchez spar for 5 minutes and then have his heart rate return to normal in just 45 seconds of rest. Salvador was dedicated to his training from the beginning, even when he rose to the very top. He was a trainaholic, if you like. He just loved to train. He would go to bed at 9:30 p.m. every night while in camp, and he'd be up again at 5:30 a.m. to start his road work. And he actually said in an interview, he said, I like to have a good time like everyone else. But when I'm training, that's what I concentrate on. It's my job and I have to do it properly. I can't disappoint my public and most of all, myself. So the fact that he's pushed himself at such a young age, and he took that all the way up through his professional career. And Sanchez was actually not based at one gym in particular. He would travel around different gyms in the Mexico City area and take on all comers. Although unknown by many outside of Mexico, he began to make a name for himself amongst those on that tough Mexican circuit. And we know through the years, very tough Mexican circuit. And he was always well conditioned, running 8 to 10 miles in the mountains 6 days a week, training at a ranch during the hottest days in Mexico, which could actually reach the heights of 90 to 100 degrees. I mean, this guy was an animal, let's be honest. An unknown source actually spoke to Retro Boxing, a big shout out to Retro Boxing, who did another career profile, if you like, on Salvador Sanchez. And this is what he said. He said, there are those that learn to fight and those that are born to fight. Salvador Sanchez, as in Sheva, was not only born to fight, but was also destined for greatness. Salvador Sanchez was a reincarnation of the Aztec warrior, built for tribal wars to hand-to-hand combat. Salvador Sanchez was a gift from the boxing gods, for one that they selfishly only wished to share for so long.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at his time on the planet, really, and the impact he's made in the sport, which is something I'm sure we'll give a bit of a synopsis of at the end. Now, eventually, Sanchez's parents would succumb to the idea of him being a boxer. After all, his one wish was to be able to support his family and earn enough money to better their lives. So, for every one of his fights, his mother taped a cross inside his shoes made from a palm branch, which was a Christian symbol of triumph. His father, Felipe, didn't go down the superstitious route. Instead, he only offered one piece of advice, and he said, no matter how good you are, never underestimate your opponent. Salvador said in Tuscan, that made sense. I've never forgotten that. Now, just 3 weeks after his professional debut, he was back in the ring, stopping another debutant in Miguel Ortiz in 3 of a scheduled 4 rounds. He made his first Mexican television appearance on April the 24th, 1976 against Jose Chavez and showcased his entertaining style of taking more shots than necessary, but he managed to stop Chavez in the 7th. He then raced to an 18-0 record in the space of just 2 years, knocking out 16 and then going the 10-round distance twice. His sole defeat came in 1977 to Antonio Becerra, who was 13-2 when he fought for the vacant Mexico bantamweight title. Becerra proved too experienced for the young Sanchez, with many articles suggesting that he won the first half of the fight before running out of steam towards the end. The fight ended in a split decision loss, but Sanchez was adamant that he was on the wrong end of a poor decision, saying, of course, as they always say, I was robbed.
I think his style, by the sounds of things, was tailor-made for Becerra, and you know, the experience prevailed. We will gradually go through Sanchez and how he adapts his style, and he does. We'll go on to it very shortly. And 3 fights later, in his American debut at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles, Sanchez was actually floored twice and actually almost stopped against one Escobar. He was only 8-2 guy. You know, these guys are. 8-2 might not sound great, but some of these guys are still tough. The Ring magazine actually wrote in their July 1978 edition that Sanchez was on the floor in the 5th round, nearly landed there again in the final minute of the fight after being stopped in his tracks by a wild left hand to the head. He hung on desperately as Escobar, a Tijuana southpaw, pummeled him, but was unable to land a clincher. I think you're getting the gist that Salvador Sanchez, not only was he he was unbelievably fit, but he could now take a punch as well, and he had great recovery powers. Now, the fight was actually declared a draw, and the crowd, well, they booed the decision, with many neutral observers suggesting that Sanchez actually lost the fight. Following the draw, he decided he's going to move up to featherweight, and he tweaked his management team by hiring trainer Enrique Hutera, who transformed the then 19-year-old's traditional Mexican brawler style to that of a boxer puncher. Now, this was a superb move from a very young head on his shoulders, that Mexican Salvador. Brilliant to be able to bring in these guys, see that he needs to improve and develop. And he was able to improve on his technical ability under the tutelage of Hutera, while incorporating that important conditioning training that he had started early on in his career. And it made him a more rounded fighter. And when he brought change of management, he tweaked his management, he didn't get rid of any Hutera into camp. The one thing you will notice from footage of Sanchez was that he began to use his jab. And obviously he was a big guy. He used his size advantage a lot more often. For a featherweight, he was tall. He was a natural. Everything he did seemed effortless, but he was also a very clever fighter for such a young man. And he actually once referred to himself as an intelligent boxer who changes depending on my opponent.
Now, Sanchez returned to Mexico after his disappointing American debut, and he took on Jose Sanchez, no relation, on July the 1st, 1978. Now, the draw with Escobar must have encouraged more changes to his style, because in this fight, he was more calculated, and he refused to waste his punches. His approach was patient, and he eventually wore his opponent down and took an easy decision to get back to winning ways. Now, the following month, he knocked out Hector Cortez, who was 23, 3-2. Now, he'd previously never been stopped, but in the 7th round, Sanchez knocked him out and then returned to America with back-to-back knockout victories. His most notable was on the same card as Mike Ayala against the Filipino Edwin Alarcon at the Municipal Auditorium in San Antonio, Texas. Alarcon suffered a cut eye and the fight was stopped in the 9th. Now, he followed that up with another impressive second-round knockout of Joe Santana back in Mexico to end 1978. Santana had been the 10-round distance with the current WBA featherweight champion Eusebio Pedrosa the year before, and Sanchez, of course, was eager to prove a point. He was the aggressor from the first bell, and he didn't back down until he finished him off.
He was. You can see the footage of that as well. He really. What I love about Sanchez's style is he was also beginning to be able to counter. He was a tall guy, but he used to fight small. And then all of a sudden he started to rise, started to fight a bit more taller. But he could duck underneath someone's jab and throw one of the best counters you'd ever see. His counter punching was absolutely outstanding. But going back to 1979, he had a busy 1979 with 8 fights, 8 wins, and 6 knockouts, and 4 were in Mexico and 4 were in America. It started with a 3rd round knockout of Carlos Mimila, where he systematically just broke this guy down with great ability. Next was a 10-round decision over James Martinez, 43-8-1. Then a 7th round stoppage of Salvador Torres, a points win over Fel Clemente, a 3rd round knockout of Rosario Muro, and then the former Puerto Rican featherweight champion and father of Trinidad Jr., Felix Trinidad Sr., at the Summit in Houston in Texas. A nice little rally off there of some big wins. And those 6 wins were in the bag, and Sanchez was now ranked at number 4 featherweight for the WBC, and he was closing in on a title shot, a world title shot with a current champion at the time, who was Danny Lopez. First, he had to get past Detroit's Richard Rosella, 15-3, at the Sports Arena in Los Angeles. His first visit to California since that draw with Escobar. He may have felt some pressure from the first fight as he came in 3 pounds overweight on the morning of the fight, which is, we've spoke about his condition. That was completely not what Sanchez was about, but he managed to burn off those extra pounds and eventually make weight comfortably. The fight was on the undercard of Danny Lopez against Jose Carba, and the number one contender, Ruben Castillo, also fought on that night. He is against Roberto Torres. And all three of the guys, Sanchez, Castillo, and Lopez, they all won by within 3 rounds by a knockout. And that victory for Sanchez, it cemented his ranking as the number 2 contender. The number 1 contender was Ruben Castillo, but he decided that he was going to move up a division, and he went up to fight Alexis Arguello rather than take on Danny Lopez. This, of course, opened the door for Sanchez to take a world title shot for Danny Lopez's world title. And Danny Lopez's manager, who's Benny Giorgino, was the son of the president of 5 Star Promotions. His name was Don Giorgino. He was more interested in his man fighting at the super bantamweight division, and the champion at the time was Wilfredo Gomez, and he was actually ready to move up in weight. So that was what they were looking at, Danny Lopez's team. They were looking at the Gomez fight. The plan was to put that to one side when the WBC then ordered that Lopez fight his mandatory challenger, who had become Sanchez after Castillo moved out. I hope everyone's got that. Castillo was a number 1 contender, decides to go up, fight Arguello, and then Sanchez opens the door for Sanchez. He then becomes a mandatory challenger for Danny Lopez, and he gets the fight. And Giorgino, he actually admitted that he would not have taken the fight if the WBC didn't insist on it. The final step for the Lopez-Sanchez fight came when Benny Giorgino encouraged Sanchez to sign with his dad's company, the 5 Star Promotions, for a 3-fight deal. And he did without hesitation because he wanted a world title shot. There was some controversy surrounding the judges when 2 of the 3 came from California, and that was the champ's home state. However, Joaz was not concerned. He was pleased with the commitment of Sanchez, and this is what he said. He said he went into seclusion for a month on a ranch in Guanajuato. We moved him from the smog to the fresh air, and he ran and he chopped wood, and he was basically ready for the big title fight against Danny Little Red Lopez.
Now, the intelligence that Sanchez spoke about earlier, it came to fruition while he prepared for the Danny Little Red Lopez fight. His handlers knew that he needed to be more mobile than he had been, and that the most effective punch against Lopez was the overhand right, a punch which Sanchez didn't really have in his locker. And the fight took place at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Phoenix, Arizona on February 2nd, 1980, and was dubbed Little Red versus Little Known due to many ringside observers claiming before the fight, Salvador who? And Lopez, he was going to knock out Sanchez by the 4th round, and some, they even mocked Sanchez's large jaw, saying it would be an easy target to find for Lopez. The fan favourite had earned a reputation as a popular TV fighter in the late 70s, as an impressive fighter who had won some spectacular fights, including David Cote in 6 rounds to win the WBC title and successfully defended the title 8 times. His most exciting fight was the war with Mike Ayala, the brother of Tony, which was named Fight of the Year by the Ring magazine in 1979. Now, as the fight approached, Cristobal Rojas said he was 90% sure that Sanchez will beat Lopez, and he said he may knock out Lopez in 1 round, but I don't see that fight going more than 7 rounds. When asked about the 10% he was unsure of, he responded by saying, "Well, Mr. Lopez can punch too."
Well, this was an action-packed fight, aired live on CBS, and Sanchez, well, he was able to demonstrate just how much he had learned and adjusted his style while in fight camp. The 16-foot ring helped him move in and out, side to side, bob and weave, and use that overhand right to great effect. It was a tremendous start by Sanchez. He staggered Lopez many times throughout the fight, especially in the first. Even Angelo Dundee repeatedly acknowledged Salvador's punching power. In the 3rd round, Lopez was cut over his right eye and Sanchez developed a nosebleed. Early in the fourth round, Lopez began to develop a swelling under his left eye. Then, during a frantic exchange, Lopez absorbed flush power punches until his nose began to bleed. And by the end of the round, his eye was almost completely shut. Sanchez opened a cut over the left eye of Lopez in the fifth. And with 15 seconds left of the sixth, referee Valdemar Schmidt stopped the action and called in the doctor to inspect Lopez's multiple cuts, who allowed the fight to continue for some strange reason. He looked battered. There was another inspection on Lopez in the seventh, but still, they fought on, while Sanchez was cut over his left eye in the same round. Now, by the 13th round, Lopez's face was an absolute mess. The left side of his face was badly bruised. Sanchez landed a right hand, left hook combination that staggered Lopez as he moved in for the finish. The referee finally stopped the fight while Sanchez was pounding Lopez into the ropes and landed vicious uppercuts and hard right hands. Sanchez jumped for joy and Lopez showed great sportsmanship in congratulating the new champion. At the time of the stoppage, all three judges had Sanchez up on the scorecards, 119 to 110, 118 to 111, and 120 to 108. And if you haven't seen it, have a look. Sanchez batters the living shit out of poor Daddy Lopez.
You would love to have been sat in the press row when that happened, because all the press that were saying, who the hell is this Salvador Sanchez? He's come from nowhere. He's little red versus little known, and he goes and does that to Danny Lopez, who was a brilliant fighter himself. And for Salvador Sanchez to come along and do that is an absolute statement. And it really was a statement of intent, and just goes to show, how, when you look back on it now in hindsight, how significant that fight was really, in the short career of Salvador Sanchez. Now, after the fight, the matchmaker, Mickey Davies, said he looked like Willie Pep. Lopez was actually full of praise a week after the fight, telling a Tuscan observer he had my style all figured out. Then I proceeded to fight a totally stupid fight. Sanchez is a boxer. There wasn't one punch that hurt me, but all of them did. He just peppered the heck out of me. He surprised me last time, but next time I'll be in there with my blood pumping. Sanchez, who had just turned 21 the week before the fight, was also full of admiration for the former champion by saying Lopez deserves a rematch. He was a great champion. He was in tremendous shape to take all that punishment. And he then went on to say, the fight should have been stopped during the first examination, but that didn't bother me. Everything was going my way. I knew I'd win a decision anyway. I never missed the overhand right. It was always there. Now, the success from this victory, well, that catapulted him into the wider audience, and he was no longer Mexico's little secret. His improved profile attracted the attention of certain big-name promoters in our good old faithful Mr. Slippery Dodgy Don King, and of course, Mr. Bob I Wasn't Lying Yesterday Arum, who at the time, well, these two guys were the biggest promoters in boxing, of course, as we know, and they held all the cards in the heavyweight division back then. As King always did throughout the years, he recognised that marketability of the young champion in Sanchez, and although Sanchez was still under contract with 5-Star Promotions for his next 3 defences, he was waiting in the shadows for when the contract was up. The promoter, Teddy Brenner, who took the WBC to court in 1980 for extortion, fraud and conflict of interest, explained the financial deal that Sanchez had actually signed up to, and he said, I don't think there should be more than one option fight, if there should be an option at all. With 3 options, promoter offer championship fights featuring the number 10 or number 12 contender. I believe in making the best match that can be made. And he continued to explain his issues when trying to sign Sanchez and his dealings with King, who adopted a similar style to 5-Star Promotions, and he said, let there be open bidding for a fight. No favoured promoters. It's a shame when I can offer 300,000 to a WBC champion, but he can't sign because he's under a free fight option with Don King for 75 grand, 100 grand and 125 grand. Now fighters say they owe something to the promoter for giving them the chance at the title, but they don't realise that the promoter needs them as much as they need the promoter. You can't sell a session of the champ shadowboxing on television. Brenner, well, he lost his case against the WBC due to a lack of evidence.
I can understand his wife. I think it's interesting to stick it in there because these fighters back then that signed this free fight deal, where all the big promoters are using, and obviously five-star promotions did. They weren't ever against King and Aaron. What they wanted to do, they wanted to be like them, and that was what the Jorginho, he come out and said that. So yeah, look, he signed for Sanchez. He's got his world title fight. He's now got 3 fights with five-star promotions. King can't touch him. Aaron can't touch him, and neither can Breno. And he did try, obviously, by the sounds of it, but he was unsuccessful. And he's pissed off about it. And he lost his case. So just 2 months after claiming his first world title, ABC, well, they put up $450,000 for the right to televise Salvador Sanchez's next fight and a summer rematch between Lopez and Sanchez. So they're looking at a 2-fight deal with him, and who in his first defense he collected $110,000. So Sanchez collected $110,000 in his first defense, and it was against a seasoned pro, Ruben Castillo. This is the same guy that obviously decided to vacate his number one contendership and move up to fight Arguello. Obviously, he's come back down. He was 44-2 at the time. Sanchez was seeking an early finish, telling the papers, "I'll be going for the knockout. If I don't stop him, I'll feel very badly." So obviously one thing in mind for Sanchez. Castillo was returning to the division, obviously, after his failed attempt to dethrone Alexis Arguello in his super featherweight division. And he boxed tremendously well against Salvador Sanchez. But he was defeated unanimously over 15 rounds at the Civic Auditorium in Tucson, Arizona. The tough Texan was convinced that he should have been given the nod, saying, "He hit me with some good shots. I hit him with better shots. Why should I feel bad? I won the fight." The way it looked today was I had to knock him out just to get a draw. So Castillo was actually ahead after 5 rounds, but he was unable to seize his initiative. And instead, he actually started to retreat and counterpunch, which allowed Sanchez to take over the fight. Sanchez almost actually stopped Castillo in the 10th, but the Tucson came back in the 11th. But it wasn't enough, and Sanchez won the fight by the skin of his teeth, to the dismay of the crowd once again. After the fight, Sanchez was generous in victory over Castillo, and he said, "I tried to bust him up, but I couldn't. He kept backing away, and I kept hitting him, so I win." Castillo reacted to Sanchez's analyst by saying that there's a time to back up, and if you don't do that, there's a time when you sure wish you had. It's one of those ones. I think for me, Sanchez won the fight. I don't think there's really many arguments, but it was close. Don Jorginho, the president of Five Star Promotion, was impressed with Sanchez's performance, and he said, in his own words, "I look at him as a machine."
Now, as already agreed with ABC Sports, Sanchez was to make his second defence of the WBC title against Danny Lopez in the rematch. Now, before the fight, Sports Illustrated asked Sanchez if he thought Lopez was too old at 27, and his response was, "As a person, no. As a boxer, yes." The fight would bag Sanchez $100,000, and Little Red Danny Lopez would get $130,000, and this was due to the terms of the rematch clause in the contract from the first fight. The rematch was initially scheduled to take place at the Salt Palace Arena in Salt Lake City, Utah, the home state of Lopez, but Five Star Promotions cancelled the fight because of a dispute over a television blackout of the fight. Don Jorginho went public and he said, "Our first preference is Salt Lake, but we have tentatively checked other locations. If we can't get the blackout, some possibilities are Tampico, Mexico, where Sanchez wanted to fight, or San Antonio, or Phoenix, and even Las Vegas." Now, the fight date never did change, and nor did the TV deal with ABC, who aired the fight, but the venue did. On June the 21st, 1980, the day after Roberto Duran defeated Sugar Ray Leonard in Montreal, Sanchez and Lopez entered Caesars Palace Sports Pavilion in Las Vegas, Nevada for their rematch and Sanchez's second defence of the WBC title. Lopez, well, he was in confident mood by saying, "I want to bring the WBC featherweight title back to Utah. I fought Salvador Sanchez one time and it will be a different fight this time. I know how to fight him now. I didn't know how to fight him before. I thought he would be a straight-up fighter, but instead he bobbed and moved a lot." He then added that, "I'm sure I'm going to regain the title. Salvador can't punch hard. He's fast and he cut me up in the first fight, but I'll be moving more in the second fight and I'll throw a lot more punches. Mills Lane took charge of the action, and it was Lopez who did as he said he would, and he would throw more punches and he applied more pressure, never taking a backward step. However, the slick Sanchez made Lopez miss regularly and would come back with counterpunches and quick hands. In round 14, Sanchez unleashed a series of combinations which forced Mills Lane to stop the fight, and Salvador Sanchez successfully retained his WBC featherweight title.
Another great statement there from Salvador Sanchez against Danny Lopez. Brilliant performance. Mills Lane absolutely right to stop that fight. And 3 months later, Sanchez made his third defense against the undefeated Patrick Ford 16-0 at the Freeman Coliseum in San Antonio, Texas on September 13, 1980. Now, before a punch was even thrown, Pat Ford's manager filed an official protest because 2 of the judges were from Mexico and they thought that they would be biased towards Sanchez. But the 2 judges, they remained. The Associated Press, they wrote on this fight, and this is what they said. They said Sanchez, apparently confused in the early rounds, regained his composure and punched out a contested majority decision over Patrick Ford to retain the WBC Featherweight Championship. Ford at 5'10" used his 6.5-inch reach advantage to score heavily in the early rounds by keeping his left in Sanchez's face. Ford sent blood trickling from Sanchez's left nostril when he rocked the champion with a left uppercut in the 3rd round. However, Sanchez moved inside the long-armed challenger and punched Ford's lower body with jabs and jolts and jolted the taller man several times with uppercuts. I'm guessing as well, like this. I think this is the only opponent Sanchez ever fought that was actually taller than him as well. And the 2 Mexican judges, well, the ones they moaned about, they scored the fight 148 to 139 and 145 and 145, a draw. The American, well, he scored it 145, 141 in Sanchez's favor. The fight was anything but straightforward for Sanchez, who actually said that I was surprised at the beginning of the fight. I was hurt in the 4th round with an uppercut, but I was never in fear of losing the fight. Again, he was able to just adapt so well to other fighters. And well, after the victory, much of the talk was all about the mouth-watering unification match between Sanchez and the WBA king Eusebio Pedrosa. It was a fight that should have been made at this point, but for whatever reason, it just never materialized. The following year, Pedrosa would actually go on to beat Ford. He actually battered Ford around the ring for 13 rounds. And many say that maybe it was an indirect way of saying to Sanchez, whatever you could do, I could do better. And Pedrosa's manager, Santiago Del Rio, he explained the battles he had in securing that fight. So just for those that have always wondered, I always wondered myself, why did Pedrosa and Sanchez never fight? Well, this is what Santiago Del Rio says. He says, this is the toughest fighter in the world, as in Pedrosa, to promote. He should have made more money. Salvador Sanchez made more out of 4 fights than Eusebio had in his great career. But he is shy, gets homesick, won't meet people. He likes to arrive in a place on a Wednesday for a Saturday fight. If planes had gyms in them, he would arrive half an hour before the bout. If they'd only head up to New York for a while, wouldn't writers see him in restaurants there? Wouldn't every little thing he did make the papers? And Sean, I mean, it is the fight. We'll move on, but this, I've just got, what a fight that would have been. Sanchez, Pedrosa, it didn't happen. I think you're getting a gist that Pedrosa here just wasn't out there like Sanchez was, and he wasn't able to, promote himself in such a way that they would get the fight on. I don't know. What do you think, Sean? It's irritating for us as fight fans that this fight never happened. But yeah, it's always been one thing that has fascinated me. When we done Pedrosa McGuigan, we spoke about it briefly, and I think it's a great time to probably speak about it now.
Yeah, I think it is. I think with Sanchez's career, you've got to look at the what-if factor of it, and this is a big what-if, really. This fight with Pedrosa should have happened, and it never did, and unfortunately, a lot of it, by the sounds of it, according to Del Rio, was down to the fact that Pedrosa he liked to do things in a certain way, as in like he didn't want to spend the time in the build up to the fight in the place where they were fighting. He didn't want to do any of the publicity. He didn't really want to do any of the media unless it was absolutely necessary. So understandably so, how could you sell that fight? I mean, on paper, the fight is amazing, but in terms of the marketability factor, of course, it wouldn't be very marketable because nobody would want to come and see a fight with Pedrosa, who, even though he was a fantastic fighter in the ring at the time, he wasn't really putting himself out there enough to want to do it. And it's all about the money as well, of course. The promotion want the money. They want to push it up to a big money fight where it's going to sell. Can they take it to somewhere like Vegas? That's what should have happened. Unfortunately, it didn't, and we never got that fight.
Yeah, it's a shame. And just to round this off, at the back end of 1980, every little thing that Sanchez did, well, it made the newspapers. Unlike Pedrosa, reports suggested that he was now a millionaire. He actually began to flaunt his wealth in public when he added another sports car to his growing collection. He loved the sports car. That was definitely one thing he loved. And he was also known to drive his friends around in his new cars and scare the life out of them, scare them after death by driving recklessly. And some of his friends even said that he would run red lights and break the speed limit on a regular basis. So that's what he'd like to do in his times outside the ring.
Now, to end the year, Don Jorginho publicly announced that a fight between Sanchez and Gomez had been finalised to take place at either Madison Square Garden, the Forum in Inglewood, or Caesars Palace in Las Vegas in December of 1980. But the fight fell through and was rescheduled for March the following year. Instead, Sanchez made his fourth defence against Juan Laporte, another excellent fighter, who was 15-1 at the time at the County Coliseum in El Paso, Texas, on December the 13th, 1980. Now, as Sanchez was now out of contract with 5 Star Promotions, he was now able to sign with another promoter. The other was, of course, Don King, who managed to convince Sanchez that he was better off with him. Now, Sanchez was reluctant to cut ties with 5 Star after they gave him his first break, so they co-promoted this fight with King. Now, Laporte, at the time, he wasn't a well-known fighter. Even many amongst his fellow Puerto Ricans didn't know him as much as the New York area because he resided in Brooklyn and he fought at the Madison Square Garden often during the early parts of his career. He had fought his way into a mandatory challenger position, but due to his lack of appreciation, Don King used his head and decided to stage the fight in a state near Mexico so the fight could sell more tickets. Don Jorginho told the press that Sanchez would earn a minimum of $100,000, but probably closer to $250,000, and Laporte, who was also aged 21, would get a pretty measly $35,000. Now, a pro-Sanchez crowd filled the County Coliseum the night of the fight, and the event was televised live on ABC. Laporte started well and pressed Sanchez early on, but he adapted and utilised his experience to his advantage. They traded punches for most of the encounter, but Sanchez was beginning to connect with the harder shots. By the later rounds, Sanchez repeatedly shook Laporte with blows to the head. However, Laporte, he dug deep and he hung in there. Much to the delight of the crowd, Laporte did not buckle under pressure. He continued to trade punches with the champion until the bell rang to end round 15. The fans gave both fighters a standing ovation after the bout, and Sanchez, he retained the WBC title by unanimous decision with scores of 148, 142, 146, 139 and 147, 140. Sanchez said after the fight, "I know I didn't do anything in the early rounds. I was waiting for him to tire. I think he wanted to leave early." He was mightily impressed by his foe's performance and then decides to go into Laporte's dressing room after the fight, and he actually told Juan Laporte that he would be the next great world featherweight champion. Laporte and Sanchez actually formed a friendship that would last the rest of Sanchez's life, and as he suggested, on September the 15th, 1982, his prediction about Juan Laporte would come to fruition, as Laporte would go on to capture the vacant WBC World Featherweight title by knocking out Mario Marinda in 10 rounds at Madison Square Garden.
Again, these fighters, when they have these tussles like this, they just become close friends. It's just how it rolls in boxing. And Laporte obviously showed a lot of guts and determination. And Juan Laporte is a magnificent fighter, an absolute legend of the sport, and another name on Sanchez's record there. I know they were both 21, both young. You could just imagine if that they could have had a few more fights, I think, at some point. It's a shame, but we'll get into that. So the fight won't last more than 8 rounds. They were the words from Salvador Sanchez about his next fight against Roberto Castanan, who was 43-1, and it lasted 2 more than he predicted. He actually halted the Spaniard in 10 rounds at Caesar's Palace. Now, negotiations began to finally heat up for the mega fight, the mega fight between the knockout artist Wilfredo Gomez and Salvador Sanchez. After the victory, Salvador's against Castanon, Salvador Sanchez told Harold Cosell that he wanted to fight Gomez next. But while waiting for the fight to be finalized, because it was definitely right there, it was ready to be done, Sanchez was able to work with the salsa sensation, who was Ruben Blades, in May 1982, on a movie that was called The Last Fight. It would actually later be dedicated to Salvador Sanchez. That was his little movie role during that time. And during this time, he also got married to Maria Teresa, and they was starting a family, which probably explains the 4-month gap between fights. But rather than wait around, because Sanchez definitely wasn't that type of guy, he wanted to be back in the gym, training again, and he could have waited around for the Gomez fight. Instead, he wanted to stay active, and he decided to take a tune-up fight, a non-title fight against a guy who was absolutely no tune-up, no layup, Nicky Perez, with a record of 49-3 and 26 KOs. And that was just 5 weeks before the biggest fight of his career. Not many, probably other than Dillian White, would do that in today's game. And it's this kind of attitude that indicates just how good Sanchez was and how much he just loved to fight. And it was aired on ESPN because ABC were not interested in the small, or such a small bout. That's what they said. That's what they considered it to be. And he won a 10-round decision with ease at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles after the verdict of 190, 191 and 98-92, all in his favor, was announced. Gomez, who sat ringside, entered the ring, and they got into a little bit of fun sparring, pretend sparring, and it helped promote their fight because that was going to be his next fight. And my goodness, what a fight.
My goodness, what a fight indeed. Legacy defining, I think, is the way to pronounce this fight.
Absolutely.
And this was Sanchez's 6th defence of the WBC Featherweight title. And he took on, of course, the undefeated Wilfredo Gomez, 32-1 at Caesar's Palace Sports Pavilion in Las Vegas, August the 21st, 1981, in what Don King promoted and dubbed the Battle of the Little Giants. Now, the reported earnings were substantial for the featherweight division, with Sanchez getting $750,000, $750,000, and Gomez $500,000. And Gomez, he went into the fight as the 9-5 favourite. Now, that's mainly because, as the challenger, he'd actually won 32 consecutive by knockout since opening his professional career with a draw. Sanchez was undeterred by these odds, and he was actually in confident mood by saying, "I'm the champion. I know I'm a better boxer than Gomez, a sharper puncher, with a better speed and reflexes." And Gomez responded by saying, "From bell to bell, I will be like a hunter looking for a rabbit. I plan to go to the body to wear the champ down. I don't underestimate or overestimate Sanchez, but if it goes 10 rounds, I predict Sanchez never fights again." Now, Sanchez was never one to trash talk, but he couldn't help it, and he bit back at Gomez a few days before the fight by saying, "You had better take your picture before the fight, because after I get through with you, you won't recognise yourself." Now, Sanchez's attorney, Juan Torres Landa, spoke of the difference between the fighters, and he said, "Wilfredo talks. Salvador prepares. Salvador has one lawyer, one doctor, and his sole obligation is boxing." Now, Gomez was 24 years old, who had been the WBC Super Bantamweight champion since February of 1977, was moving up in weight class. So you would have thought that making the weight would have been a breeze. Well, apparently, no, it wasn't. He had to actually take off £4 to make the £126 limit by getting up 4.5 hours before the weigh-in, while Sanchez, who was 22, trained for the bout by sparring 220 rounds and weighed in £126 on the button. Now, the fight was not aired on ABC, which had televised Sanchez's 5 defences. Instead, it was shown on closed-circuit television. The culprit for the change was, of course, Don King. Now, a capacity crowd of nearly 5,000 were in attendance, and Sports Illustrated described the spectacle inside the venue perfectly when they wrote, "The scene inside the sports pavilion on Friday night was more Latin than Nevadan. The walls were adorned with huge Mexican and Puerto Rican flags, and the fans in the arena, many dressed in the colours of their favourites' homeland, waved smaller banners and shouted, 'Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico,' or 'Mexico, Mexico.'" Now, you can catch this fight on YouTube in its entirety, and anybody that knows about Salvador Sanchez's career, this is the go-to fight. It is the go-to fight. It's the legacy-defining fight. It's what we remember him by. You know, as we go through the course of his life in the second part of the episode here, you know, we always remember Salvador Sanchez for, you know, being the what-if guy. You know, look at his career so far. Look what we've covered so far. This fight, if you've not seen it already, please go and watch it. Please do go and watch this fight after listening to the episode, because you will not be disappointed. Johnston, if you want to take us through what else happened in the build-up and the fight itself.
Oh, it's just an absolute belter, and it's seriously good quality as well. That on YouTube, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's one of my favourite fights. And Michael Katz of the New York Times, he wrote this on the long-awaited WBC Featherweight title fight. He said, "Sanchez, cool and calm as always, is defending his title. Almost scored a first-round knockout in a wild fight that more than lived up to expectations. He had Gomez down in the opening 30 seconds with a stunning left right cross combination. Loved that. Thrown with his back to the ropes. Sanchez then pulverized the cheekbone, which swelled gradually throughout the fight until Gomez's right eye was almost hidden. Yet Gomez, who had a streak of 33 straight knockout victories, including 14 in title fights, after starting his pro career with a draw in 74, somehow survived the opening round and went back on the attack at the start of the second. Throughout the fight, there were fierce toe-to-toe exchanges as Sanchez did not back down from the smaller man. Referee Carlos Padilla, not one of the only, he's done quite a few fights, Carlos Padilla, some super fights, and he stopped the fight after Gomez, with his right cheekbone, both eyes closed, his nose bleeding, bravely got up from his second knockdown in the 8th round in his confrontation of champions. And I can't tell you how much of this is just unreal. I mean, what he does to poor Wilfredo Gomez is unbelievable. I mean, we felt that was the best description of the fight there. All 3 judges had the fight very close going into that 8th round. Dwayne Ford and Charles Minka actually had it 67-65 for Sanchez, but the other judge, Henry L. Supru, had it 67-66 for Gomez. While the 2 impressive victories over the exciting Lopez gained Sanchez popularity in the boxing world, it was this fight against Wilfredo Gomez, this bout that turned Salvador Sanchez into an absolute superstar. And Sean, I'll let you come in, mate. I mean, what a performance for Sanchez that was.
Yeah, that is what I was saying before you went through that brilliantly written article by Michael Katz. This is that fight where, if you want to go back and look at certain fights in boxing history, this is one of them. Like, you know, I always think of this fight and I think of it of, it's ecstasy and agony. You know, like, I watch it and I think I'm so like chuffed about like the performance, even all these years later. I mean, I've watched it multiple times and it's like, You get these 2 different range of emotions for me. It's the ecstasy of seeing an artist at work, but then the agony is knowing that, you know, this man could have gone on to do so much more. And this was really the tip of the iceberg, this victory over Gomez. and it's really sad. And obviously we've got, you know, the incident with his life to go through yet. But this fight, sticking back with obviously what happened, you know, Sanchez, you know, he said after the fight, he told Sports Illustrated, "I fought the fight. I had to. I knew I would win." But he also went on to say that he was disappointed that the fight didn't go the distance. And when asked why, he said, "Because I wanted to punish him, to beat him for 15 rounds. At the post-fight news conference, Gomez's lawyer, who was part of his Bazooka Gomez sports promotion, Gabriel Penagarciano, blamed the weight issues prior to the fight as the reason for Gomez's defeat, saying there is no question the weight influenced the outcome immensely, but that is absolutely no excuse. Sanchez proved tonight he was a formidable champion." Sanchez signed a 4-fight deal with Don King after the Gomez win, and his new promoter was looking at all options. King said he was asked by the WBA holder, Eusebio Pedrosa, to arrange a unification fight, but Sanchez apparently said that he was not interested because he was more intent on going up 2 weight divisions to challenge Alexis Arguello for the WBC Lightweight Championship. Now this was true, but you have to also consider that Bob Arum promoted Pedrosa, so the chances of King and Arum working together was always going to cause problems. So maybe when we go back to that conversation earlier about the fight with Pedrosa, at the time when this was mentioned again, would it have really happened? Possibly not, because of the conflicting promoters in Don King and Bob Arum.
Something we probably should. Yeah, I think it was a gradual. I don't know if how long Pedrosa had Arum as his promoter, but either way, I mean, the chance of that is just going to be even more slim now. It's just not going to happen, is it? But maybe who knows? It's all ifs and buts when it comes to Sanchez. But I mean, Sanchez is just jumping back to him, continuing his career. He ended a successful year defending the WBC title live on HBO against the British Featherweight champion Pat Codell. 19-2 at the Astrodome in Houston, Texas, winning by a split decision after flooring the brave Brit in final 15th round. And what a shot, what a fight. Codewell, mate, take my hat off to you. I watched this fight the other night, and he gave Sanchez problems. He really did. And it was a split decision because Cowdell was really terrific that night. But what a shot. Oh, my goodness. How Cowdell got his feet on that 15th round, I do not know. Larry Merchant spoke of Sanchez during the HBO broadcast, and this is what he said. He said, "When a champion is as physically talented as the man is, his main opponent is himself." And I think he was absolutely bang on. Salvador Sanchez rounded off an impressive year at as the number 1 in the pound-for-pound category, whatever you want to call it. He was the man. He was the best fighter on the planet at this time. Many people had him top of their list. The only closest rival to him at this time was a certain Sugar Ray Leonard, but there was no clear one. It was just one or two at the time. And now, although I'm sure Pedrosa would have seen this in a different light, he's the champion of WBA, but Leonard and Sanchez were the names. The ring actually decided that they couldn't split the two. Sanchez and Sugar Ray Leonard. They actually decided that they would get the Fighter of the Year award for 1981. Impressive stuff. This was the same year as well that Leonard, you've got to remember, Leonard knocked out Tommy Hearns in one of the biggest fights of all time, and a fight that we've done on our legendary nights. It's incredible, really. It just demonstrates just how regarded Salvador Sanchez was. I mean, I'm going to come to you again, Sean. What? People forget about how they forget about Salvador Sanchez. When we speak about Duran, we speak about Leonard, and then obviously Hearns and Hagler. Salvador Sanchez never crops into that conversation because obviously we'll go into that in a minute. But if he had been around again, it'd have been another edition, surely.
This is it. You know, the mouth-watering fight between Salvador Sanchez and Alexis Arguello is one that, you know, like, it's a fantasy fight now. Unfortunately, it's a fantasy fight that we'll always dream about. And it's like, you know, you can think of who Salvador Sanchez could have gotten in the ring with during this period of time, and there's so many fighters around at the time that he could have got in the ring with. And you think of, I think in the lightweight division, you think of Arguello, you think of Ray Mancini as well. You know, he would have been another cracking fight with Salvador Sanchez at this particular point in time. But this was how well regarded he was the fact that he was given a joint Fighter of the Year award with Sugar Ray Leonard because they couldn't split the pair of them. Because you think about the fact that Sugar Ray Leonard, he'd lost to Duran the previous year, he'd won the title back from Duran. The following year, 1981, he then obviously goes on to beat Tommy Hearns, which really starts to cement his early legacy in his boxing career. And to put these two guys' names together, it just makes you think, knowing what Sugar Ray went on to achieve, what the hell could Salvador have gone on to achieve? It really does sort of baffle the mind as to what if, to be honest. Now after that great year that he had, attentions, of course, swiftly turned to that possible fight in the lightweight division against Alexis Arguello. Now, during a post-fight press conference after Arguello stopped James Buscemi, his normally tight-lipped agent Bill Miller hinted at a possible showdown with Salvador Sanchez, and he said, "All our options with a specific promoter are now exhausted, and we can now offer our services to the highest bidder." Salvador Sanchez would be a big money fight for Alexis. Sanchez wants to move up a weight division or two, and certainly is a big attraction. Don King is currently promoting Sanchez, so we'd have to deal with him. He also promotes the defences of junior welterweight champs Aaron Pryor and Sal Mambe if we want to go for a fourth title. But there may be other alternatives such as Andy Ganigan or perhaps a unification of the division with Art Frias. We'll just have to wait and see. Instead, they did actually opt for Ganigan. But that May, Salvador Sanchez, well, he made his intentions very clear, and he called Arguello out through the press, stating, "The reason I fight is to beat 3 champions, Danny Lopez, Wilfredo Gomez, and Alexis Arguello. 2 of them have already been done."
That's actually quite a scary statement there from Sanchez. 2 down, 1 to go. Alexis Arguello was there. He was ready to take him out. Well, Sanchez's 8th defence was on May of 1982 against Jorge Rocky Garcia, 23-2. Now, it was an uneventful 15-round victory, but Sanchez did earn himself a nice $150,000 and a chance to buy some more sports cars. And by the time the summer arrived, a fight between Sanchez and Arguello seemed to be off the table when the Nicaraguan told the press that Sanchez wanted $2.5 million. That was too much. I think the fight is over. Now, it would have seemed that way, but when your rival's promoter becomes the first to establish his own television network, the Don King Sports and Entertainment Network, or DKSEN, that sort of money became possible. Now, if ABC, the NBC, CBS or ESPN, they didn't want to show a Don King fight, then he could simply put one on for himself, which meant that our Arguello fight was still a very strong possibility. Instead of getting a unification with Pedrosa, Sanchez opted to defend the WBC featherweight title for the very, very last time on his Madison Square Garden debut, no less, against an undefeated and another fantastic name, but at the time a very largely unknown Azuma Nelson, undefeated, 13-0, 10 KOs on July 21st, 1982. Now, Nelson was actually a late replacement brought in on a 2-week notice when the original opponent, a number 1 contender from Colombia, Mario Miranda, actually pulled out through injury. Rocky Lockeridge was offered the fight initially, but his promoter Lou Duva turned it down because they had limited time to prepare for Sanchez. Ruben Castillo was the next target, but he turned down the offer for the same reason. But he would continue to have an obsession with Sanchez after the Nelson bout, calling him out and threatening the WBC if he didn't get his shot. However, Juan Laporte, the guy Castillo was demanding an elimination fight with, did confirm that he would be ready, but his management, well, they turned it down. They chose to fight on the undercard instead. So it could have been Juan Laporte, didn't. In the end, it was Nelson. Just before Sanchez made his way to the ring, he gave his new friend, Juan Laporte, who was supposed to fight, who fought on the undercard, a pair of boxing gloves as a gift. The fight was actually aired on, of course, Don King's network, with the ABC rerunning the fight days later. Nelson was not expected to give Sanchez much of a fight, but it turned out to be one of the toughest fights of his career, and I might add that it is an absolute belter. If you haven't seen it, again, another fight. If you don't know much about Sanchez, go watch this one. It's a belter.
It was an entertaining fight right from the start. A fight in the phone booth with Nelson getting hurt repeatedly with left hooks to the head. It was in round 7 that Sanchez actually finally broke through, landing a clean left hook that caused the challenger to stumble backwards. After a barrage of punches from Sanchez, he finally dropped Nelson with another crushing left hook. Nelson was given the mandatory 8 count by referee Tony Perez, but he was back on his feet and engaging with Sanchez. It continued, with both fighters landing plenty of hard shots, and by the 15th round, they were exhausted. But it was Sanchez who came out and stung Nelson badly with a hard right and another destructive left that staggered him badly just before falling into a corner. Nelson got up, but he was in a bad way, so Sanchez seized the opportunity, landing a couple more until Nelson wobbled again, prompting Tony Perez to jump in and call a halt to proceedings in the final round. Sanchez showed his greatness by stopping a young and aggressive Nelson, even though Sanchez was going to win on the scorecards. After the impressive victory, Sanchez said, "He was a very strong fighter with a lot of heart. He came to take my title. I wanted to finish him off earlier, but he was too strong." John Kermer, Nelson's manager, said if Azuma had had a few more fights, he would have won. Next time, you'll see a different Azuma Nelson. Unfortunately, we'd never see that. That'd never happen. The rematch wouldn't happen again, unfortunately. The featherweight legend, Willie Pep, was actually in attendance. He was so impressed with Sanchez that he admitted, "I'm glad he wasn't around in my era."
That is a great compliment, that. My goodness me. After the bout, Don King announced that Salvador Sanchez and Juan Laporte, who fought on the undercard, will rematch on September 15 at Madison Square Garden, but also spoke on the proposed move up in weight to face Alexis Aguayo as well for that junior lightweight title. He, as in Sanchez, already signed to fight Aguayo. Aguero has also signed, but he's doing what he always does, reneging on contracts, basically hiding away from him. That's what King felt. King wasn't the only one who thought that Aguero was avoiding the fight. According to Sanchez's attorney, one Jose Torres Landa, he felt that Aguero didn't want to face Sanchez because he would have trouble with the Mexican style. Now, even if they had gone on to fight, Sanchez made his position clear. He intended to retire at 25 years old and become a doctor. He said not long after the Nelson win, "I've already distinguished myself in boxing. Now I'd like to distinguish myself in life. I want to carry on studying and become a doctor." In his own words, that's what he wanted to do. Unfortunately for Sanchez, he would never be able to carry out his dream. Less than a month after the Nelson fight, Sanchez spent the morning shadow boxing as he began training for his rematch with Juan Laporte. Alejandro Toledo traced his movements during the afternoon of August 11, 1982, in his book, De Puno y Letra. Now, during lunch, he received an unknown phone call that made him agitated, according to a witness Toledo spoke with. Sanchez grabbed his car keys and he sat quietly while rattling them impatiently in his hand. He mentioned wanting to take his car to Quintero to have his mechanic look at a horn. Rojas told him not to bother, that he had noticed the day before that the mechanic was away. Another person at the training camp said that he was told that he wanted to go into town to purchase a new album. Jose Cabrera, a good friend and sparring partner of Sanchez, he actually confirmed that Sanchez, this is what he said, that Sanchez had a mistress and that he wanted to go into town to basically spend the day with her. He even elaborated on his version of events, saying that Sanchez asked him to go with him. But by the time he had changed from his sparring gear, Sanchez had already left without telling anybody. Whatever the reason, he made the unexpected and unusual, especially from training camp, 160-mile trip north of New Mexico at 4 o'clock that afternoon.
Now, it was revealed that Sanchez visited several clubs in Querétaro and was surrounded by friends, or some suggest fans, until late that night. In the early hours of August 12, 1982, Salvador Sanchez was driving home on the San Luis de Postioy highway in his new Porsche 928, heading back to camp at 3:30 a.m. when his Porsche rammed into the back of a pickup truck. Now, there were conflicting reports from Spanish newspapers who reported that Sanchez's car was rear-ended by another truck and that the impact sending the Porsche into the oncoming lane where it collided with another truck head-on. The details are pretty irrelevant at this point. I think what we do know is that the featherweight champion, at just age 23, died instantly. The American press said that police confirmed that he was driving at high speed when he crashed into a heavily loaded tractor-trailer. A spokesman for the police was also quoted in the Mexican press by saying, "All we know up to now is that Sanchez was driving alone in his 1981 white Porsche when the car became involved in a very bad crash with a half-a-ton Ford pickup and a heavy-duty truck." Some have indicated that his face struck the steering wheel and the large vehicle crushed the roof of his sports car, which caused the fatal wound to his skull. The very next day, Cristobal Rojas had the heartbreaking job of identifying the body, and he confirmed that Sanchez had left behind his 21-year-old wife, Maria Teresa, and their two sons, 16-month-old Christian Salvador and 4-month-old Omar, which, as we've said all the way through the episode, for anybody that didn't know the story of Salvador Sanchez's untimely demise, well, that was it. Unfortunately, whatever happened that day, whatever prompted him to do what he did that day and end up driving at high speed, which we knew he liked doing from all accounts and all the sources that we read up on, but to be doing it at a really strange time of the night, you just never know what was going through the guy's mind. You just don't know what was going on that day. There's many, many reports that are conflicting about what happened to him, why he was so agitated. Did he have a mistress? Didn't he have a mistress? Was he just going out and having a good time? It seemed like to me it was just something completely out of character. And that moment, that day where he was out of his character, it cost him his life.
It did, and I think the one thing we do know for sure is that he had this phone call. I think a lot of sources, 3 or 4 people, have said that he definitely got this phone call and it made him agitated. And it was they could sense that it was different. It was something he had heard, something had rattled him that afternoon. And no matter what anyone told him, tried to convince him, no, just stay, just stay. Normally he would just stay. And he was disciplined in his training camp. He would never travel 160 miles north of New Mexico south for any reason. It just wouldn't really. It doesn't make sense really, and the road wasn't lit very well. Why did he drive home so early in the morning? Could he not have just stayed somewhere else and come back in the next day when it was light? It's just a sad way, a tragic way of him ending. And as the news began to break, many within boxing began to mourn the loss of the great champion. Wilfredo Gomez, he said, "I don't have the words to express my feelings. In truth, I'm very sorry. In this world, we are only visitors and one must accept it." Mary Goldman, a publicity director for Don King Promotions, said, "I think it's a great tragedy that this is one of the finest young men I ever met in boxing. He was really just starting out. He had so much to look forward to. It's a shame even before his peak he's gone. I would rate him among the great featherweight champions of modern times. He could fight anybody. He was always superbly conditioned and he was always surrounded by nice people. What a loss." And Laporte's manager, Howard Albert, told Mexican News, "I'm just heartbroken. To me, he was like another Aguero, a gentleman, a credit to being a champion. And he was an educated man." Rocky Lockeridge's manager, George Benton, was shocked by the news, saying, "Oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry. I'm shocked. I really liked him. He was a nice kid." And the matchmaker for Madison Square Garden said, "It's a real sad thing to happen to such a nice guy. Nothing happens to criminals. Always something happens to nice guys like him."
Yeah, sad. So sad. And, we'll come to our conversation in a couple of moments once we've rounded up this story and this career profile of Salvador Sanchez, but it just goes to show you, how much people adored him, how many people within the boxing circuit respected him, and the sad thing about it is, Sanchez does actually make the unwelcome list of being the third fighter in boxing history to die when holding a title. The others being Stanley Ketchel, who was fatally shot in 1910, and Pancho Villa, another world featherweight champion who died of blood poisoning because of an infected tooth in 1925. Strangely, it is often said that Sanchez had premonitions of his own death. He would make comments with those very close to him about not living a long life and spoke about the way he wanted his funeral arranged. Now, his funeral, it was held in his hometown and over 50,000 people showed up to pay their respects. Sanchez earned about $2 million in boxing, most of which had been carefully invested in property and security. And of course, he did love his cars, and he did end up buying 9 of them, with the Porsche being his favourite. Now, just on a side note here, in the aftermath of Princess Diana's death in 1997, many boxing observers then theorised, and Don King was included in this, they theorised that Sanchez was actually trying to escape the Mexican paparazzi in the early hours of the morning, and they believe that that could possibly have been the reason for him getting involved in a road traffic collision. It's possible, but they're only rumours and they're only theories. There's absolutely no evidence to suggest that there's any truth to the matter. But, anybody that loves a good conspiracy theory, there's one for you in this episode. I don't think it's true, personally. I think the actual accounts that we've been able to source, that's quite common knowledge, is probably more likely to have been the actual case. But yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Like, you speak about like his life, and even now, it's quite interesting that even now, every year on the anniversary of his death in Sanchez's hometown of Santiago Tianguistenco, Mexico, they actually host a 4-day celebration in honor of his life, and that's even now, in 2021, that they still do this, and that's how much of a lasting impact that he has had in his boxing career.
Oh, mate, and his mum actually run all this. There's a site, you can have a look at it. There is a website. Just put in Salvador Sanchez like webpage or something like that on Google, and it'll come up, and it's got all the information. They send pictures out there and everything. It's really sweet. And Mexicans celebrate death, don't they? They celebrate life. They don't necessarily mourn death. And I think that's a 4-day celebration in honor of his life. That's crazy. It's brilliant, though. I love that. And in his career, just rounding this off, in his career, he beat 2 future Hall of Famers in Wilfredo Gomez and Azuma Nelson. He took on great opposition, beating Danny Lopez twice, Juan Laporte, Ruben Castillo, Patrick Ford, and Roberto Castanon. In 1991, Sanchez was actually inducted into the National Boxing Hall of Fame. In 1999, the Associated Press named Sanchez the 3rd greatest featherweight in the 20th century. And just a quote here from a couple. There's a few quotes. I'll roll off the first 2 and I'll let you end the last one, Sean. So Wilfredo Gomez said, "I'm convinced that Salvador Sanchez was the best Mexican fighter of all time, even better than Julio Cesar Chavez." James Toney was another great admirer of Sanchez, and he said, "The greatest Mexican fighter of all time is Salvador Sanchez, period, hands down." An opponent of James Toney's as well, Roy Jones Jr., his favourite ever fighter, Salvador Sanchez.
Jerry Eisenberg said Salvador Sanchez was a fighter of the 40s or 50s, operating in the vacuum of the 80s. To watch Sanchez at work was to watch the kind of artistry that is so rationed in this age of media-hype fighters and challengers of synthetic skills that people often didn't understand what they were seeing. On nights that Sanchez boxed, rounds weren't simply fought to be won. They were fought to be taken advantage of the nuances of the 3 minutes that preceded them, and the 3 minutes that would follow. And the doing was so professional that the victim rarely knew what was happening. He was one of the 5 or so best fighters in the world during this time. He was an artist who transcended the mediocrity around him. And Jerry Eisenberg with some
Ledge.
Yeah, Ledge, with some great words. Some great words about Salvador Sanchez. So I suppose for us, it's time to just give our personal final thoughts on the career of Salvador Sanchez. And, we've spoke about it quite a lot throughout the course of the episode. So, apologies if we are kind of going over old ground a little bit. But I think the biggest question is, can you rank him as the best featherweight of all time? Personally, I don't think I could. That's my opinion. I'll let you say your piece in a second, but I think for me personally, I can't, because I just think that because of his untimely demise, he wasn't able to get them other fights. I think if he would have moved up and beaten Alexis Arguello, or even moved up and maybe fought another guy that went on to become a world champion, I think maybe then you could have had a bit of an argument for that. But I think because of his untimely demise, it really did sort of put a stop to where you can put him. You can definitely put him in your top 3 greatest featherweights of all time.
Yeah.
Top featherweight of all time, not for me personally, but I ain't taking nothing away from him because he was an absolutely unbelievable fighter. And the whole what if scenario of him not passing away, who would he have fought? Who would he have beaten? Would he have become a multiple weight world champion? I think so. Personally, I think so. I think that's when we could have been talking about him being the greatest fighter of all time. It didn't happen, unfortunately. He the untimely demise of him at 23. It's just cruel. It's cruel to boxing, and it's mad that we get to do an episode on a fighter like who had such an impact in such a short space of time, that we are discussing him as one of the greatest featherweights of all time. Some people who listen to this might say, hands down, he's the greatest featherweight of all time, and I respect your opinion on that. Not for me personally, but I definitely respect everybody's opinions on that. Johnston, I know you've mentioned Salvador Sanchez, greatest featherweight of all time. Is he your greatest featherweight of all time, and what do you think about the what ifs?
I mean, when I think of featherweight, I think Willie Pep, Emery Armstrong, Sandy Sadler, even. Yeah, look, I think when you look at what they've done in their careers, those 3 names in particular, especially Willie Pep and Emery Armstrong and Sandy Sadler, because he was quite tall for the featherweight division. So just looking at it as a featherweight, I think I would have them 3 ahead of him, merely because of the longevity of their careers. But if you take a peak Willie Pep against a peak Salvador Sanchez, I mean, it's fantasy, isn't it? It really is. There's not enough footage on Willie Pep. We read about Willie Pep and how great he was, and we just accept what we're being told. And the stats don't lie when it comes to Willie Pep. So and Henry Armstrong, who ended up becoming a multiple weight world champion, but featherweight for me was Henry's really top weight. And so yeah, I think when you look at it that way, I think they probably do Sanchez. But then peak versus peak, I think Sanchez was murder for a lot of them. I just think he was so smart and so big and powerful that I think he causes them problems. So I mean, watching him and looking at his resume up to the age of 23, what could he have done if he'd have fought another 7 years? I mean, he's tempted his own fate, saying he's going to retire at 25. Maybe he would have retired and returned to the ring. When that happens, they don't come back as good. I think if he'd have got the Aguayo fight, I think that would have been an amazing fight. I mean, oh God, I can't even tell you how mouth-watering that would have been. 2 of my favourite fighters personally, reading about and just watching that you can source on YouTube. What a fight. It's just, yeah, not the best featherweight, so I'm with you. I think I could, at 23, to have such a limited career, for him to be sitting sort of in the top 3 is an amazing achievement. What a fighter.
What a fighter indeed. And I want to say thank you to everybody that wanted this episode doing. Like, there's many people that asked for it in multiple different ways, and I can't remember everybody off the top of my head, and I apologise for that. But I want to thank you all, because this is something that we've wanted to do ourselves for a while, but there's that many fighters out there that, the possibilities are endless with career profiles, which is why we don't run it in seasons, is why we run it as a continuous show, because we couldn't, there's that much content out there. We could be doing this for 5-6 years and still only just be scratching the surface of career profiles. And obviously in that time, people will come up in the ranks, people will retire. We could be doing career profiles on guys that are around now in 6 years' time. So, Salvador Sanchez is an absolutely talented fighter, deserved a spot on career profiles, deserved to be able to talk about his career, and it's been a wonderful episode for us to sit down and do. And also in putting this together, the research that we that we go through and the sort of information we find out is also great to learn about, because we don't necessarily always know it ourselves. So it's great to learn about these additional things and these stories about certain fights and build-ups and how things went and why fights didn't happen. It's great to know this information, and I hope you guys have actually enjoyed listening to this career profile. And if you have, please do go and let us know on social media at career_profiles or at BTR Boxing Pod. We're on YouTube. Get subscribing. BTR Boxing Podcast Network, Facebook, Instagram. You'll find us on there. If you search for BTR Boxing Podcast Network, you'll find all the available shows: Darker Side of Boxing, Career Profiles, Legendary Nights, and of course the main feed. And we want to say a big thanks to everybody that's been listening. A big thanks to the patrons who will be listening to this early as part of their membership service. If you've not checked out the Patreon service, again, as always, we implore you to go and check it out to get early access to episodes like this and some of the unreleased general content that we've got in there as well. Please do go and check that out. That's at patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Johnston, as always, it's been a pleasure doing Salvador Sanchez, one of the greatest featherweights of all time. Absolutely unbelievable featherweight, and I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to this episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening to